The escape pod drifted silently through the vast emptiness of space, its small interior filled with the quiet hum of life support systems. The crew of the Thunderclap sat in solemn silence, their faces pale and drawn from exhaustion and grief. They had survived, but the cost weighed heavily on all of them. Leo's sacrifice was a wound that wouldn't heal easily. Jack stared out the tiny viewport, his mind replaying the events that led to this moment. The Thunderclap was gone, destroyed in a blaze of glory, but it had accomplished what no one thought possible. It had taken down the Vraxian fleet and saved Earth from invasion. Against all odds, humanity had prevailed, not because of superior technology or flawless planning, but because of sheer determination and heart. After what felt like hours, a faint light appeared in the distance. It grew brighter, revealing the shape of a rescue vessel sent by Earth Command. The crew exchanged weary glances as the ship approached, its sleek design a stark contrast to the battered hulk they had called home. When the rescue team boarded the pod, their expressions were a mix of relief and disbelief. "You're alive," one of them said, shaking his head. "We didn't think anyone could survive after that explosion." Jack managed a weak smile. "We're harder to kill than you'd think." The survivors were brought aboard the rescue ship, where medical teams tended to their injuries and offered warm meals. For the first time in days, the crew felt safe, but the weight of their loss lingered. Leo's absence was a constant reminder of the price they had paid. Back on Earth, the story of the Thunderclap spread like wildfire. News outlets hailed the crew as heroes, recounting their impossible victory against the Vraxians. The public embraced the tale of an underdog ship that refused to give up, even when everything seemed hopeless. Statues were erected in honor of the fallen, including Leo, whose bravery became a symbol of humanity's resilience. Admiral Carter watched the celebrations from his office, his expression unreadable. He had once dismissed the Thunderclap as a useless relic, but now he couldn't deny its impact. Humanity's survival rested not on perfection, but on imperfection, the ability to adapt, improvise, and overcome. Karen stood beside Jack as they attended a ceremony in their honor. Medals were pinned to their uniforms, and speeches praised their courage. But Jack barely heard any of it. His thoughts were with Leo and the others who hadn't made it back. "They're calling us heroes," Karen said softly, her voice tinged with sadness. "But none of us feel like heroes." Jack nodded. "Heroes don't leave people behind. We got lucky." And Leo made sure of that. Later that evening, Jack found himself standing alone in front of a memorial plaque dedicated to the Thunderclap. The names of the lost were engraved in bold letters, with Leo's at the top. Jack placed a hand on the cold metal surface, his throat tight with emotion. "You did good, Leo," he whispered. "Better than anyone could have asked for. This ship might be gone, but it changed everything. You changed everything." As he walked away, Jack felt a strange sense of peace. The Thunderclap had been far from perfect. It was clumsy, unpredictable, and often infuriating. But it had also been brave, stubborn, and full of heart. In the end, those qualities mattered more than any flaw. Humanity might have started with the stupidest warship anyone had ever seen, but it had ended with something extraordinary. Proof that even in the face of overwhelming odds, hope could triumph. And that was a legacy worth remembering. The message came through late in the night, flashing urgently across the main screen on the bridge. Admiral Carter's stern face appeared, his expression unreadable as always. Jack straightened up, his tired posture vanishing instantly. This was it, the moment they'd all been dreading. The Vraxians were moving closer to Earth, and humanity needed answers, or at least a distraction. "Captain Monroe," Admiral Carter began, his voice clipped and formal, "we've received intel that a Vraxian fleet is gathering near Neptune. Your orders are simple. Intercept them before they advance further into our territory." Jack didn't respond immediately. He glanced at Karen, who raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Simple? Nothing about this mission would be simple. The thunderclap wasn't built for precision strikes or stealth maneuvers. It was more likely to fall apart mid-flight than accomplish anything resembling success. Still, orders were orders. "Understood, sir," Jack replied finally. "We'll do what we can." Carter hesitated, then added, "Don't fail us, Captain. Humanity is counting on you." As the transmission ended, the weight of those words settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Jack exhaled slowly, turning back to his crew. They were already preparing for the mission, though their expressions ranged from determination to quiet dread. "All right, people," Jack said, raising his voice slightly to get everyone's attention. "You heard the man. We're heading to Neptune. Let's make sure this bucket of bolts doesn't fall apart before we get there." Karen stepped forward, holding her clipboard tightly. "Sir, I've reviewed the ship's status report. What little we have, and things aren't great. Shields are at 60%, which isn't terrible, but the weapon systems are still glitching. And the engine efficiency, well, let's just say we might not break any speed records." Jack nodded grimly. "Leo, how long until we can launch?" Leo emerged from beneath a nearby console, wiping his hands on a rag. His face was streaked with dirt, and his usual scowl seemed even deeper than normal. "If I can patch the coolant leak and stop the backup generator from overheating again, we'll be ready in 2 hours. Maybe 3 if something else breaks." "That's cutting it close," Jack muttered. "Lisa, once we're underway, I want you monitoring every frequency. If the Vraxians are out there, I don't want any surprises." Lisa nodded enthusiastically, her blonde ponytail bouncing. "Got it, Captain." For the next hour, the crew worked tirelessly. Leo cursed under his breath as he wrestled with stubborn wiring, while Karen coordinated tasks and double-checked equipment. Lisa tested the communication array, only to discover yet another malfunction that required quick thinking to fix. Even Jack pitched in, helping wherever he could. Despite the chaos, there was a sense of purpose in the air. Everyone knew what was at stake. Finally, the thunderclap shuddered to life, its engines roaring louder than usual. Jack took his seat at the command console, gripping the armrests as the ship lurched forward. It wasn't graceful. It never was. But they were moving. Slowly but surely, they left Earth's orbit behind and set course for Neptune. As the stars streaked past the viewport, Jack allowed himself a moment of reflection. This mission felt impossible, but humanity had faced impossible odds before. The thunderclap might be a mess, but it was their mess. And somehow, that gave him hope. "Keep an eye on those readings, Karen," Jack said after a pause. "We don't know what we're walking into." "No kidding," Karen replied dryly. "But if anyone can pull this off, it's us." Jack smiled faintly. She was right. For all its flaws, the thunderclap had one thing going for it: its crew. Together, they'd find a way to survive, even if it meant relying on sheer luck and a lot of duct tape. The thunderclap approached Neptune's orbit, its engines groaning like an old man climbing stairs. The ship's sensors were barely functioning, but they managed to pick up faint energy signatures ahead. It wasn't just one Vraxian cruiser. It was 3. Jack felt a knot tighten in his stomach. 3 ships against their one. This wasn't going to be easy. "All right, everyone," Jack said, trying to keep his voice steady. "We've got company. Stay sharp." Karen studied the readings on her console, her brow furrowed. "Their shields are strong, Captain. Much stronger than ours. If they decide to attack, we're in trouble." Jack nodded grimly. "Leo, how are the weapons systems holding up?" Leo glanced up from his workstation, his face pale under the dim bridge lights. "They're functional. Barely. But don't expect them to hit anything on the first try, or maybe even the second." Before Jack could respond, the ship's targeting system suddenly came to life. Without warning, the thunderclap's cannons fired, not at the Vraxians, but wildly into empty space. The recoil shook the entire ship, sending loose tools and papers flying across the bridge. "What the hell was that?" Jack shouted, gripping the edge of his chair. Lisa looked up from her station, wide-eyed. I didn't do anything. The system just activated itself. Perfect, Karen muttered, shaking her head. Now they definitely know we're here. Sure enough, the Vraxian ships turned toward the thunderclap, their sleek designs glinting menacingly in the light of Neptune. Red lights began flashing along their hulls, a clear sign they were preparing to fire. Panic rippled through the crew, but Jack forced himself to stay calm. Leo, get the shields online. Now, he barked. I'm trying. Leo yelled back, his fingers flying over the controls. Sparks erupted from a nearby panel as he worked, but after a tense moment, the shields flickered to life. Not a second too soon, the first volley of enemy fire slammed into them, shaking the ship violently. Shields holding at 50%, Karen reported, her voice tight with worry. But I don't know how long they'll last. Lisa frantically tried to open a communication channel with the Vraxians. Maybe we can talk our way out of this, she suggested, though her tone betrayed her lack of confidence. When the transmission finally connected, Lisa leaned into her microphone. Attention, Vraxian vessels. We are peaceful explorers. Her words were cut off by a burst of static, followed by what sounded like angry growling. Then, to everyone's horror, the ship's AI chimed in with its own contribution. Your mothers look funny. Ha ha ha. The bridge fell silent for a split second before chaos erupted. Did that thing just insult them? Karen exclaimed, pointing at the AI console. It's programmed to translate languages, Lisa stammered, her face turning red. I think it misunderstood my tone. Well, unmisunderstand it. Jack snapped. Now. Lisa fumbled with the controls, but it was too late. The Vraxians clearly weren't amused. Another barrage of laser fire struck the thunderclap, pushing the shields to their limit. Alarms blared throughout the ship, and the crew scrambled to respond. We can't take much more of this, Karen warned, her hands trembling as she monitored the damage reports. Jack clenched his jaw, thinking fast. Leo, is there any way to boost engine power? If we can move faster, maybe we can confuse them. Leo hesitated, then nodded. I can reroute some auxiliary power, but it'll put extra strain on the core. We might blow ourselves up instead. Do it anyway, Jack ordered. We don't have a choice. As Leo worked, Jack turned to Karen. Any ideas for counterattacks? Or should we just throw wrenches at them? Karen gave him a thin smile. Let's save the wrenches for later. But if we time our shots carefully, we might be able to exploit their formation. They're clustered pretty tightly. Jack nodded. Lisa, when I give the signal, fire everything we've got. Aim for the middle ship. Lisa swallowed hard but nodded. Got it. Moments later, Leo's adjustments kicked in, and the thunderclap surged forward with surprising speed. The sudden movement caught the Vraxians off guard, giving Lisa just enough time to lock onto the central cruiser. When Jack gave the order, she pressed the firing button. The thunderclap's cannons roared to life, unleashing a chaotic storm of energy blasts. Most missed their mark entirely, but a few struck true. The middle Vraxian ship shuddered under the impact, its shields flickering dangerously. They're breaking formation, Karen shouted, a hint of excitement in her voice. Keep pushing, Jack urged. We've got them rattled. For the first time since the battle began, the crew felt a spark of hope. The thunderclap might be a mess, but it was starting to show signs of fight. The Vraxian ships were reeling from the unexpected attack, their sleek formations crumbling into disarray. For a moment, it seemed like the thunderclap might actually stand a chance. But Jack knew better than to celebrate too soon. The enemy wasn't defeated. They were just regrouping. All right, people, Jack said, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. We caught them off guard, but they'll recover fast. We need to keep the pressure on. Karen glanced at her console, her fingers flying over the controls. Their shields are still up, but they're weaker now. If we hit them again. She was interrupted by another violent shudder as the Vraxians retaliated. The thunderclad's shields dropped to 30%, and sparks rained down from the ceiling. Leo let out a string of curses as he scrambled to stabilize the ship's systems. Shields won't hold much longer, Karen warned, her voice rising with urgency. Jack gritted his teeth. They couldn't afford to sit back and wait for the enemy to regain control. He turned to Leo. Is there anything else you can do? Any tricks left in this tin can? Leo hesitated, then nodded. I can overload the engines temporarily. It'll give us a burst of speed, but it'll fry half the circuits in the process. Do it, Jack ordered without hesitation. We need every advantage we can get. As Leo worked furiously to reroute power, Jack turned to Lisa. Once we've got that speed boost, I want you to send out decoy signals. Make them think we're everywhere at once. Lisa blinked, surprised by the idea, but quickly nodded. Got it, Captain. A few tense moments later, Leo gave the signal. Ready when you are, Captain. Now, Jack shouted. The thunderclap surged forward with a deafening roar, its engines glowing brighter than they ever had before. The sudden acceleration threw everyone off balance, but it worked. The Vraxians struggled to lock onto their erratic movements. Lisa activated the decoy signals, flooding the area with false energy readings that confused the enemy even further. They're firing blindly, Karen exclaimed, relief creeping into her voice. They don't know where we are. Good, Jack said, allowing himself a small smile. Let's keep it that way. Taking advantage of the confusion, Jack ordered Lisa to target one of the remaining Vraxian cruisers. This time, the cannons fired more accurately, thanks to the brief window of opportunity created by their chaotic tactics. A direct hit rocked the second cruiser, sending debris spiraling into space. Yes, Lisa cheered, pumping her fist in triumph. That got them. But the celebration was short-lived. The third Vraxian ship, clearly realizing what was happening, adjusted its strategy. Its weapons locked onto the thunderclap, unleashing a devastating volley of fire. The shields collapsed entirely, and alarms blared throughout the ship. We're exposed, Karen yelled, panic edging her voice. Everyone brace yourselves, Jack commanded, gripping his chair tightly. The impact sent the entire crew sprawling. Panels exploded, wires sparked, and smoke filled the air. Through the chaos, Jack could hear Leo shouting about critical failures in multiple systems. Despite the damage, the thunderclap somehow managed to stay intact. For now. Status report, Jack demanded, pulling himself back to his feet. Karen wiped soot from her face, coughing as she checked her console. Engines are barely holding together, life support is flickering, and communications are down. But we're still alive. That's something, I guess, Jack muttered, glancing at the viewport. The surviving Vraxian ship was retreating, likely calling for reinforcements. They'd bought themselves some time, but not much. Leo stumbled over, his face pale but determined. Captain, we can't take another hit like that. Not without falling apart completely. I know, Jack said quietly. Turning to his crew, he raised his voice. Listen up. We may not have the best ship or the fanciest tech, but we've got heart. And sometimes, that's enough. Let's patch this thing up and be ready for whatever comes next. Though battered and bruised, the crew nodded, determination burning in their eyes. The thunderclap might be a disaster, but it was their disaster, and they weren't giving up yet. Back on Earth, news of the thunderclap's unexpected success spread quickly. For the first time in months, humanity had a reason to feel hopeful. The crew of the battered warship had managed to take down 2 Vraxian cruisers, a feat that seemed impossible given their outdated equipment and constant mechanical failures. But while the public celebrated, not everyone in command was pleased. Admiral Carter paced his office, his polished boots clicking against the cold floor. He stared out the large window behind his desk, watching as ships docked at the orbital station outside. His hands were clasped tightly behind his back, knuckles white with tension. On one side of the room, a holographic display showed footage of the battle near Neptune. The thunderclap moved erratically, firing wildly but effectively. It looked less like a military operation and more like chaos incarnate. "They're calling it a miracle," said Commander Hayes, standing stiffly by the door. She adjusted her uniform, clearly uncomfortable under Carter's piercing gaze. "The media is hailing them as heroes." Carter snorted. "Heroes? That ship is a disgrace. A flying junkyard held together by luck and duct tape. This isn't how wars are won." Hayes hesitated before responding. "Sir, regardless of the condition of the ship, they did accomplish the mission. They stopped the Vraxians from advancing closer to Earth." "Barely," Carter snapped. "And at what cost? Half the systems on that ship are fried, and we don't even know if it can make it back here in one piece. Humanity deserves better than this. Circus act." He turned sharply, his sharp eyes locking onto Hayes. "I want you to draft an order for the decommissioning of the Thunderclap. Once they return, we'll scrap it and assign the crew to other vessels." Hayes frowned slightly. "With respect, sir, the crew has proven themselves capable despite the circumstances. Decommissioning the ship might hurt morale." "Morale?" Carter barked, slamming his fist on the desk. "We don't have time for morale. We're fighting for survival, Commander. Every resource counts. That ship is a liability, and I won't risk it again." Hayes opened her mouth to argue further but thought better of it. Instead, she nodded curtly. "Understood, sir. I'll prepare the paperwork." As Hayes left the room, Carter returned to staring out the window. Deep down, he knew there was some truth to what she'd said. The Thunderclap had achieved results no one expected. But pride and practicality outweighed sentimentality. To him, the ship represented everything wrong with humanity's current state: desperation, inefficiency, and reliance on improvisation over strategy. He wouldn't tolerate it any longer. Meanwhile, aboard the Thunderclap, Jack Monroe sat alone in his quarters, reviewing the damage reports. The battle may have been a victory, but the cost was clear. The ship was barely holding together, and the crew was exhausted. Still, they'd pulled through when it mattered most. As he scrolled through the data, a private message appeared on his screen. It was from Admiral Carter. "Captain Monroe," the text read, "your actions have been noted. However, upon your return, the Thunderclap will be decommissioned. Further details will follow." Jack stared at the words, anger bubbling inside him. After everything they'd done, after risking their lives to protect Earth, this was how Command repaid them, by stripping them of the only thing they had left. Before he could dwell on it further, there was a soft knock at the door. Karen stepped in, looking concerned. "Captain, I just heard rumors about Earth Command planning to scrap the ship. Is it true?" Jack sighed heavily, showing her the message. "Looks like it." Karen crossed her arms, her expression hardening. "They can't do this. Not after what we've done." "I know," Jack replied quietly, "but orders are orders." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Karen straightened up, determination gleaming in her eyes. "Then let's give them something worth remembering. Something that proves this ship, and this crew, isn't expendable." The surviving Vraxian cruiser didn't waste time. After retreating briefly to regroup, it returned with reinforcements. 5 ships in total, all equipped with advanced cloaking technology. The Thunderclap's sensors couldn't detect them, leaving the crew blind and vulnerable. Tension filled the bridge as Jack and his team scrambled to find a solution. "We're sitting ducks out here," Karen muttered, her eyes glued to the empty radar screen. "If we can't see them, we can't fight them." Jack clenched his jaw, pacing back and forth across the cramped space. He knew she was right. Without a way to track the enemy, the Thunderclap wouldn't last long against an ambush. But giving up wasn't an option. Not now. Not ever. Leo leaned over his workstation, tapping furiously at the controls. "What if we use the old radar system? It's outdated, sure, but maybe it can pick up something the new sensors miss." Karen frowned. "Like what?" Cloaked ships don't leave trails. They do if they're big enough, Leo countered. Even cloaking tech has limits. The gravitational pull from their ships might cause tiny disturbances in the surrounding area. If we tweak the radar to look for those, we might be able to spot them. Jack stopped pacing, considering the idea. It was risky, and it relied on a lot of guesswork, but they didn't have many options left. Do it, he said firmly. Karen, help him recalibrate the system. Lisa, keep monitoring communications. They might try to taunt us again. The crew sprang into action. Leo and Karen worked side by side, rerouting power and adjusting settings on the ancient radar equipment. Sparks flew occasionally, but they ignored the minor malfunctions, focusing instead on getting the system operational. Meanwhile, Lisa listened intently to the static-filled comms, hoping for any hint of the Vraxian's location. Minutes dragged by like hours. The tension on the bridge grew heavier with each passing second. Finally, Leo let out a triumphant shout. Got it. Look at this. On the radar screen, faint blips appeared, barely visible, but unmistakably there. 5 shapes moved slowly through space, their positions marked by subtle gravitational ripples. The cloaking technology hid their physical forms, but it couldn't mask their presence entirely. They're circling us, Karen said, tracing the patterns with her finger. They're waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Then let's give them something else to think about, Jack replied, a determined glint in his eye. Turning to Lisa, he added, send out another decoy signal. Make them think we're preparing to run. Lisa nodded and began broadcasting false engine signatures, simulating the thunderclap attempting to flee. On the radar, the blips shifted slightly, moving faster as the Vraxians adjusted their formation to intercept. They're taking the bait, Karen whispered, a small smile forming on her lips. Good, Jack said. Now lock onto their positions and prepare to fire. We'll only get one shot at this. Leo hurried back to his station, rerouting power to the weapon systems. The thunderclap's cannons hummed to life, shaky but functional. Lisa held her breath as she inputted the coordinates, her hands trembling slightly. Ready when you are, Captain, she said softly. Jack took a deep breath, then gave the order. Fire. The thunderclap unleashed a barrage of energy blasts, aiming directly at the invisible targets revealed by the radar. At first, nothing seemed to happen. The shots passed harmlessly through empty space. Then, one by one, the cloaked ships flickered into view as their shields absorbed the impacts. 2 cruisers sustained critical damage, their hulls cracking under the pressure. Another veered off course, clearly struggling to maintain control. It worked, Lisa exclaimed, clapping her hands together. We actually hit them. But the victory was short-lived. The remaining Vraxian ships retaliated fiercely, their weapons cutting through the thunderclap's already weakened defenses. Panels exploded, lights flickered, and the ship groaned under the strain. Despite the chaos, the crew refused to give up. Keep firing, Jack shouted, his voice steady despite the destruction around him. We've got them on the ropes. One final blast struck a Vraxian cruiser dead center, causing it to explode in a brilliant flash of light. The shockwave rocked the thunderclap, sending everyone stumbling. When the smoke cleared, only 2 enemy ships remained, and they were retreating. They're pulling back, Karen announced, relief washing over her face. For a moment, the crew simply stared at each other, too stunned to speak. Against all odds, they'd survived another battle. The thunderclap might be battered and broken, but it still floated, and so did their spirits. The battle was over, but the cost had been steep. Smoke filled the corridors of the thunderclap, and the hum of failing systems echoed through every room. The crew worked tirelessly to keep the ship from falling apart completely, their movements slow and weary. Despite their victory, there was no celebration, only grim determination to survive long enough to make it back to Earth. In the engineering bay, Leo Hart was a man possessed. His face was streaked with soot, his hands blistered from hours of working without gloves. He crouched near the reactor core, which had begun to overheat dangerously during the fight. If he didn't stabilize it soon, the entire ship could go up in flames. "Come on, you piece of junk," Leo muttered under his breath, twisting a wrench furiously. Sparks flew as he adjusted a loose connection, his frustration boiling over. "Why can't you just work for once?" Karen appeared at the doorway, her expression tense. "How's it looking down here?" Leo glanced up briefly, his scowl deepening. "Not great. The core's holding steady, for now. But I can't leave it unattended. If it overheats again, we're done." Karen nodded, her mind racing. "Do you need help? I can stay." "No," Leo interrupted sharply. "You're needed on the bridge. Someone has to keep an eye on the rest of the ship while Jack figures out our next move. I'll handle this." Karen hesitated, torn between staying and leaving. Finally, she gave him a small, grateful nod. "Just don't push yourself too hard, okay?" Leo didn't respond. He was already focused on the task at hand, his fingers moving quickly to reroute power and reinforce the cooling system. Karen lingered for a moment longer, watching him work, before turning and heading back toward the bridge. On the bridge, Jack stood at the command console, staring at the flickering display. The damage reports painted a bleak picture. Shields were offline, engines were running at half capacity, and life support was on the verge of failure. The thunderclap had survived the battle, but it wouldn't last much longer without serious repairs. Lisa sat at her station, trying to patch together what remained of the communication array. Her hands trembled slightly as she worked, exhaustion catching up to her. "Captain," she said quietly, "I've managed to send a distress signal to Earth Command, but I don't know if they'll receive it." Jack turned to her, his expression unreadable. "They'll get it, and even if they don't, we'll find a way to make it home." His words carried confidence, but Lisa wasn't convinced. She glanced at Karen, who offered her a reassuring smile. Still, the weight of their situation pressed heavily on all of them. Minutes later, alarms blared throughout the ship. Karen checked her console, her eyes widening. "Captain, the engine room is reporting critical failures. If we don't stabilize the core soon, we'll lose propulsion entirely." Jack cursed under his breath. Without engines, they'd drift aimlessly in space, a death sentence if the Vraxians decided to return. He grabbed the intercom microphone. "Leo, status update." There was a pause before Leo's voice crackled through the speakers. "Still working on it, Captain. The core's stable for now, but I'm going to need more time." "You don't have it," Jack replied bluntly. "We're losing systems fast. Can you hold it together long enough for us to limp back to Earth?" Another pause. When Leo finally spoke, his voice was strained but resolute. "I'll do what I can. Just give me 10 minutes." Jack clenched his jaw. 10 minutes might be all they had left. "Everyone, buckle down. We're not losing this ship, not after everything we've been through." As the crew braced themselves, Leo continued his frantic efforts in the engine room. Sweat poured down his face as he worked, his body pushed to its limits. The reactor core groaned ominously, threatening to collapse under the strain. With shaking hands, Leo made one final adjustment. And then, miraculously, the warning lights dimmed. "It's holding," he whispered, collapsing onto the floor in relief. "For now, it's holding." He dragged himself to his feet, leaning heavily against the wall. His legs felt like jelly, and his vision blurred, but he forced himself to move. Staggering toward the door, he activated the intercom. "Captain, the core's stable. You've got your 10 minutes." Jack exhaled sharply when he heard the news. "Good work, Leo. Get up here when you can. We're going to need you." By the time Leo reached the bridge, the rest of the crew had rallied around him. Though battered and bruised, they shared a quiet moment of solidarity. They'd faced impossible odds and survived, not because of their equipment or training, but because of each other. "We've still got a long way to go," Jack said, breaking the silence. But we've proven that even the stupidest warship can pack a punch. Let's keep it together until we get home." The crew nodded, determination burning in their eyes. The thunderclap might be broken, but its heart was still beating. And that was enough to keep them fighting. The thunderclap limped through space, its engines sputtering and its systems flickering like a dying light bulb. The crew worked nonstop to keep the ship running, but it was clear they were fighting a losing battle. Every creak of the hull and every flash of static on the monitors reminded them how close they were to disaster. Still, they pressed on, driven by sheer willpower. On the bridge, Jack stood at the helm, his face lined with exhaustion. He stared at the navigation screen, which showed their slow progress toward Earth. At this rate, it would take days, maybe even weeks, to reach home. And that was assuming nothing else went wrong. "We're not going to make it," Karen said quietly, breaking the silence. Her voice wasn't panicked, just matter of fact. She glanced at the damage reports on her console, shaking her head. "Life support is failing faster than we can fix it. If we don't find a solution soon, we'll run out of oxygen before we even get close to Earth." Jack didn't respond immediately. He knew she was right, but he couldn't let the crew lose hope. Not now, not after everything they'd been through. Turning to Lisa, he asked, "Any response from Earth Command yet?" Lisa shook her head, her blonde ponytail bouncing slightly. "Nothing. Either they didn't receive our distress signal, or they're too busy to help us. Or they've already written us off," Karen muttered under her breath, though loud enough for everyone to hear. Jack shot her a sharp look. "We're not giving up. Not while we still have options." Karen crossed her arms, frustration evident in her expression. "What options, Jack? We're flying a ship that's falling apart. Even if we survive long enough to get back, Earth Command has already decided to decommission the thunderclap. What's the point of fighting for something they don't even want?" Her words hung heavy in the air, and for a moment, no one spoke. The truth stung, but it was impossible to deny. After all their sacrifices, humanity's leaders saw the thunderclap as nothing more than a relic, a symbol of failure rather than resilience. Finally, Leo stepped forward. His clothes were still stained with grease, and his face was pale from exhaustion, but his voice was steady. "Maybe they don't value the ship, but they should value what it represents. Humanity doesn't win because we have the best tech or the strongest armies. We win because we refuse to quit, even when the odds are stacked against us. That's what this ship stands for." Jack nodded slowly, a spark of determination reigniting in his eyes. Leo's right. This isn't just about the thunderclap. It's about showing Earth Command, and ourselves, that humanity is worth fighting for. The crew exchanged glances, unsure but willing to follow their captain's lead. Lisa broke the silence first. "So what's the plan?" Jack took a deep breath, thinking carefully. "We use the teleportation system." Everyone froze, staring at him in disbelief. The teleportation device had been malfunctioning since day one, often sending objects, or people, to random locations. It was unpredictable, dangerous, and generally avoided at all costs. "Are you serious?" Karen asked, raising an eyebrow. "That thing barely works as a paperweight, let alone a weapon." "I know," Jack admitted, "but it's the only thing we haven't tried yet. If we overload it, we might be able to create a massive energy surge, one strong enough to scatter the Vraxians if they come after us again." Leo frowned, scratching his chin. "I see where you're going with this, but overloading the teleporter could tear the ship apart. Are we really willing to risk that?" Jack met his gaze, unwavering. "Do we have a choice?" After a long pause, Leo sighed and nodded. "Fine, let's do it. But someone needs to stay behind to manage the core while the rest of us prep the teleportation system." Without hesitation, Leo volunteered himself. "I'll handle it. You guys focus on setting up the trap." Karen started to protest, but Leo cut her off. "It's my job to keep this ship alive. Besides, I've spent more time with the core than anyone else. If anyone can keep it stable, it's me." Jack placed a hand on Leo's shoulder, gratitude shining in his eyes. "Thank you, Leo. We won't forget this." As the crew split up to prepare, Leo returned to the engine room, his mind racing. He knew the risks. He might not survive, but he also knew the stakes. The Thunderclap wasn't just a ship. It was proof that humanity could rise above its flaws. And if sacrificing himself meant giving his crew a chance to live, then so be it. Back on the bridge, Jack and the others worked quickly, rerouting power and calibrating the teleportation system. Each step brought them closer to their last stand, but none of them hesitated. They were battered, bruised, and exhausted, but they weren't beaten. Not yet. The Vraxians returned faster than anyone expected. Their 2 surviving cruisers emerged from the void of space, sleek and menacing, their weapons already charging for another attack. The crew of the Thunderclap braced themselves, knowing this was their final stand. "Here they come," Karen said, her voice tight as she monitored the approaching ships. "They're not wasting time." Jack nodded grimly, his hands gripping the edge of the command console. "Everyone, stay focused. We've got one shot at this. Make it count." In the engine room, Leo worked feverishly to stabilize the reactor core. Sweat poured down his face as he adjusted settings and rerouted power to keep the ship running just a little longer. His movements were deliberate but hurried, every second feeling like an eternity. He knew the teleportation system would overload soon, and when it did, there was no guarantee he'd survive the blast. On the bridge, Lisa and Karen coordinated the final preparations. Lisa typed furiously at her station, programming the teleportation device to target the largest cluster of Vraxian ships. Karen kept a close eye on the energy readings, ensuring the surge would be powerful enough to scatter the enemy. "They're within range," Karen announced, her tone sharp with urgency. "We need to activate the teleporter now." Jack hesitated for a brief moment, then gave the order. "Do it." Lisa pressed the activation button, and the entire ship shuddered violently. A low hum filled the air, growing louder and more intense with each passing second. Lights flickered wildly, and sparks flew from overloaded panels. The crew held on tightly, their faces tense with anticipation. In the engine room, Leo felt the vibrations grow stronger. He knew the core wouldn't last much longer. Grabbing the intercom microphone with trembling hands, he called out to the bridge. "Captain, I'm holding the core steady, but you need to finish this quickly. It's not going to last." "We're almost there, Leo," Jack shouted back. "Just a few more seconds." The hum reached a deafening pitch, and the teleportation system erupted in a blinding flash of light. Energy surged outward in a massive wave, engulfing the Vraxian fleet. Their cloaked ships flickered into view, caught in the chaotic distortion field created by the overloaded device. One cruiser exploded instantly, its hull torn apart by the overwhelming force. The second ship veered off course, its systems crippled as it tumbled away into deep space. "It worked," Lisa exclaimed, her voice breaking with relief and disbelief. "We actually did it." But the victory came at a cost. The Thunderclap groaned under the strain of the explosion, its systems failing rapidly. Alarms blared throughout the ship, warning of imminent collapse. "Leo, get out of there," Jack yelled into the intercom. "The core's about to blow." There was no response. Jack's heart sank as he realized Leo hadn't made it out in time. The engineer had stayed behind to ensure the plan succeeded, sacrificing himself to save the rest of the crew. "We have to go," Karen urged, grabbing Jack's arm. "The whole ship is coming apart." Reluctantly, Jack turned away from the console and led the remaining crew toward the escape pods. They moved quickly, their steps heavy with grief but driven by survival. As they launched into space, the thunderclap erupted in a fiery explosion behind them, lighting up the darkness like a dying star. From the safety of the pod, Jack stared out the small window, watching the wreckage fade into the distance. His chest tightened with sorrow, but also with pride. The thunderclap might be gone, but its legacy would live on. Against all odds, they had defeated the Vraxians and protected Earth. "We'll make sure Leo's sacrifice isn't forgotten," Jack said quietly, his voice firm despite the tears in his eyes. "He gave us a chance to survive. Now it's our job to honor that." The others nodded silently, their expressions somber but resolute. Exhausted and heartbroken, they drifted through space, clinging to the hope that humanity's resilience would carry them through, even without their beloved ship. The escape pod drifted silently through the vast emptiness of space, its small interior filled with the quiet hum of life support systems. The crew of the Thunderclap sat in solemn silence, their faces pale and drawn from exhaustion and grief. They had survived, but the cost weighed heavily on all of them. Leo's sacrifice was a wound that wouldn't heal easily. Jack stared out the tiny viewport, his mind replaying the events that led to this moment. The Thunderclap was gone, destroyed in a blaze of glory, but it had accomplished what no one thought possible. It had taken down the Vraxian fleet and saved Earth from invasion. Against all odds, humanity had prevailed, not because of superior technology or flawless planning, but because of sheer determination and heart. After what felt like hours, a faint light appeared in the distance. It grew brighter, revealing the shape of a rescue vessel sent by Earth Command. The crew exchanged weary glances as the ship approached, its sleek design a stark contrast to the battered hulk they had called home. When the rescue team boarded the pod, their expressions were a mix of relief and disbelief. "You're alive," one of them said, shaking his head. "We didn't think anyone could survive after that explosion." Jack managed a weak smile. "We're harder to kill than you'd think." The survivors were brought aboard the rescue ship, where medical teams tended to their injuries and offered warm meals. For the first time in days, the crew felt safe, but the weight of their loss lingered. Leo's absence was a constant reminder of the price they had paid. Back on Earth, the story of the Thunderclap spread like wildfire. News outlets hailed the crew as heroes, recounting their impossible victory against the Vraxians. The public embraced the tale of an underdog ship that refused to give up, even when everything seemed hopeless. Statues were erected in honor of the fallen, including Leo, whose bravery became a symbol of humanity's resilience. Admiral Carter watched the celebrations from his office, his expression unreadable. He had once dismissed the Thunderclap as a useless relic, but now he couldn't deny its impact. Humanity's survival rested not on perfection, but on imperfection, the ability to adapt, improvise, and overcome. Karen stood beside Jack as they attended a ceremony in their honor. Medals were pinned to their uniforms, and speeches praised their courage. But Jack barely heard any of it. His thoughts were with Leo and the others who hadn't made it back. "They're calling us heroes," Karen said softly, her voice tinged with sadness. "But none of us feel like heroes." Jack nodded. "Heroes don't leave people behind. We got lucky." And Leo made sure of that. Later that evening, Jack found himself standing alone in front of a memorial plaque dedicated to the Thunderclap. The names of the lost were engraved in bold letters, with Leo's at the top. Jack placed a hand on the cold metal surface, his throat tight with emotion. "You did good, Leo," he whispered. "Better than anyone could have asked for. This ship might be gone, but it changed everything. You changed everything." As he walked away, Jack felt a strange sense of peace. The Thunderclap had been far from perfect. It was clumsy, unpredictable, and often infuriating. But it had also been brave, stubborn, and full of heart. In the end, those qualities mattered more than any flaw. Humanity might have started with the stupidest warship anyone had ever seen, but it had ended with something extraordinary. Proof that even in the face of overwhelming odds, hope could triumph. And that was a legacy worth remembering.